Welcome to the third and final session of Learner-Centered Leadership, the book club with Learner-Centered Collaborative. We are so excited to have you all here to join in a discussion with Devin Vodicka and our special guest today. So let me just do some quick welcomes. If you haven't already, feel free to pop into the chat, share where you're joining us from, your role, and maybe something you're excited to talk about today as you closed out your reading this past week. Welcome. So just a quick look back at what we've accomplished together as a community over the last 3 weeks. First, we came together and we discussed our framework for the future. Then we dove into a discussion around relational trust and social capital last week. And to round out our time together, today we'll really be focusing on learner-centered systems, which I'm really excited about. As you all know, we keep our learner-centered collaborative norms at the forefront of the work that we do. And I'll ask again today that you read through these and think about one that you want to hold for yourself today. Today, I really think we're going to start talking about putting some of this work into action. So for me, I'm really going to think about how do I approach this work with courage. But maybe for you, there's another one that's sticking out. So if you just want to put it in the chat, that's how we hold ourselves accountable to these norms. So which one is speaking to you today? Great, I still see some hellos happening in the chat. Great, approaching with gratitude, I love that. Curious and humble. Great. Thank you all for sharing in the chat. Curious and humble learners, impact driven. Awesome. Yeah, so just keep that at the forefront today as you hear our special guest and Devin dive into this work. And then when you go into your small group, really thinking about how you want to hold that for yourself. So let's dive in. Devin, with no introduction needed, this is week 3 of our time together. Our CEO of Learner-Centered Collaborative and the author of Learner-Centered Leadership. Devin, welcome to our third session. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you, Kelsey. It is a joy to be with this group. I see some familiar faces, some new names, some new people. So welcome, everybody. I'm coming to you today from Escondido Union School District, where we're doing a partnership with them. Escondido is in North County, San Diego, and they're very excited about making the shift to learner-centered education. And so they've also generously let me use the conference room while there's a training going on next door. So appreciate everybody being here. And I'm so thrilled to be joined by someone I consider to be a mentor, and that's Tom Vander Ark, who is the founder, CEO, and partner of Getting Smart. So welcome, Tom. Thanks for joining us here today. And Tom, maybe, to start, just introduce yourself to the group, tell them a little bit about your background, and then we'll jump in with a whole host of questions about how we make this shift to learner-centered education and how we know if we're making progress along the way. But please introduce yourself, Tom.
Hey, thank you, Devin. Hey, it's great to be with you all. I think unlike many of you, which probably responded to a call to teach really in life, I guess I was a midlife convert. I had a business career in Denver in engineering and retail and the energy sector. So a wide range of business perspectives in small companies and big ones. And it was really visiting schools in Denver that led me early in my 30s to understand I was doing the wrong thing with my life, that I wanted to teach and lead learner-centered systems. And a few years later, had the opportunity to become a school administrator here in Washington State. And for the last 30 years have been leading systems and working as a investor, both a philanthropist and a venture investor, and an advocate for powerful learning experiences for all kids. Along the way, for the last 12 years, I've been trying to sort of learn out loud and write in blogs and papers and books to try to share some of the things that my team and I are learning about how we can better serve more kids at some level of scale. So that's the work that we really care about today, is really powerful learning experiences, but delivered at scale with equity in mind.
Yeah, and Tom, I think your perspective is fantastic in many ways. Just, you know, your thoughtfulness and your intention, but also the incredible perspective that you have from other sectors, as well as deep educational background. It's a real gift to us. Am I remembering correctly that you were the first educational leader at the Gates Foundation? I can't remember your title when you were there, but
yeah, I was a superintendent here in Washington, and I started helping Bill and Melinda with their philanthropy in the 90s. Helped them develop a training program for all the principals in the state of Washington on tech-enabled learning. The Gates Foundation, or the Gates family, I guess, it helped me and my system here in Federal Way go one-to-one in 1995.
Mm-hmm.
So we were kind of early leaders in blended learning. We started an online school here in 95.
Wow.
We're having our anniversary next week, Devin. And then I was able to help them when they decided to make a really big commitment to philanthropy, help them start what became the Gates Foundation, and spent most of a decade there. And that was an extraordinary opportunity to visit thousands of schools all over the United States. A real wonderful learning journey for me.
Yeah, unbelievable. What an amazing opportunity. And as you said, you know, you've seen hundreds, thousands of schools, not only in the US, but internationally as well. And I want to jump into, you know, a topic that I know is near and dear to your heart, which is, how do we know if we're making progress? How do we, you know, when we shift to these new models, whether it's, you know, a one-to-one program, you know, in the past, or whether we're talking about a new initiative, you know, in the moment. How do you think about the outcomes that matter the most in a context that keeps changing?
So that's a super big question. There's like a book length answer to that question, right? It's measurement and learning.
Yes.
Let me give a quick two-part answer to this. And just for contrast, in 1983, I was a senior VP at a national Costco competitor, $5 billion company with 150 stores that I had built all over the United States. And every morning I got sales by SKU by store. So I could tell you by item, by store, exactly how our company was doing. And then when I became a school administrator, I found that I didn't know anything about any of my students or any of the teachers I had the good chance to work with. It was like flying blind. It was really quite bizarre, from going from a high data system to a no data system.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember, Devin, that like 25 years ago, I was kind of an advocate for testing to add data to the system just to inform our progress.
Right.
And, you know, I guess I was in that early group of equity warriors that viewed testing and data as a equity as critical to creating more equity in our system.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say that we we made that an early priority. And then when I was at the Gates Foundation, the irony of my first year there around 2000 is that I really helped stand up No Child Left Behind by making grants to all of the equity organizations in Washington, D.C., Education Trust, Katie Haycock being a key player there. And we really viewed the bipartisan support around measurement as a critical equity step. So that was one part of my life. And on the other part of my life, I was helping to launch all the best progressive school systems in the country, big picture learning and expeditionary learning and high tech high and new tech network and Minnesota New Country and the teacher powered schools. And so I had these two parts of my life of wanting to add measurement for equity and wanting to promote powerful learning through authentic and project-based systems. And 22 years ago, Devin, I thought those two ideas could somehow harmonize and come together.
Yeah,
in
how's
a
that working?
Single view of measurement, and that didn't really work out so well. And so, apologies to everybody on the call for any culpability I have around NCLB. That certainly went off the rails, and it was a well-intentioned effort. I do want to stress that it really was a point in America where we had an unusual level of bipartisan leadership for better education for all kids. That was a beautiful thing. And there were some elements of supporting schools in a progressive way that were a good thing. But we obviously are 20 years in and have seen this go completely off the rails and a real misuse of measurement, primarily for accountability as opposed to measurement for teaching and learning. And so today, Devin, I'm most interested in helping systems build thoughtful dashboards that inform, first and foremost, learners, so they can understand who they are and how they're growing, and second, can inform teachers to understand the progress that learners in their care are making. But third, also to understand system leaders, how they can better support learners. The big difference, Devin, I think from 20 years ago is that our primary concern then was in reading and math. And today, I think your learner-centered collaborative is really a beautiful example of an organization with outcome framework around agency and collaboration and problem solving. I've come to believe that those are really the most important outcomes that we can promote through rich learning experiences. And so when I say a data dashboard, I'm interested in information that helps learners and teachers and teacher leaders understand, are we developing learner agency? Are we building the muscle for collaboration? And are we developing problem solving skills? And I think everybody on this call knows that we're early, we're nascent, we're sort of immature in the way that we measure all of those. But I'm excited about signs of progress all over the country that, number one, more schools are making those outcome areas a real priority. Number two, they're creating more rich learning experiences that promote those outcomes. And number three, they're getting more sophisticated about feedback systems that provide better information for learners and teachers and leaders.
Love it, love it, love it. And one of the things that I would just, that really resonates for me is this idea that for a long time, we've thought about measurement and assessment and accountability from this sort of outside in approach. And NCLB, as you said, well-intended effort, but
it was purely extrinsic, right? And
the primary audience
fear-based.
Exactly. What was outside. And so you ended up with these unintended consequences of federal to state to local to school to teacher to student. And I think one of the things that I'm encouraged by is seeing more and more systems flip to, what if we took an inside out approach? What if we started with the learner and said, how do we use feedback to guide that sense of self, that sense of collaboration?
Yeah. Devin, let me tell you a quick story that this also happened on that magical 1999 school tour where I visited hundreds of schools. I had the chance to visit the Chugach school district in Anchorage, Alaska, and they had pieced together a beautiful personalized and competency-based system that served learners often in remote villages, small one-room schoolhouses. And I saw really for the first time in my life, a system that informed the learner first. And every learner had a dashboard on their desk or on their backpack that showed them exactly how they were doing on every outcome area every day. And every learner could tell you how they were doing and what they needed to do to move to the next level. So I saw and heard expressed a level of learner agency, ownership for their own learning that I had never experienced. And kids could really take responsibility for their own learning and for helping other learners because it was so transparent. So that picture has really stayed with me for the last 20 years. And that goal of being able to create systems where learners understand the outcomes, they own and can promote their own progress, both for themselves and for others. I think, so when you say learner-centered, that's the sort of picture that comes to mind of kids that own the outcomes and can co-design experiences and reflect on their own learning and that of co-learners.
Yeah, love that. And part of what, I think about with that is we often talk about, gradual release of responsibility and going from teacher-led to co-constructed to learner-driven. But for some reason, we neglect to do that when it comes to assessment and reflection. But the idea that students can be active agents in self-assessing, providing peer feedback, taking ownership of those outcomes and setting next steps is something that I think is very inspiring.
Yeah, Devin, I'll give you a quick example from our friends at the New Tech Network. This is 200, mostly high schools around the United States. Most are in school districts. About half are schools of choice and about half are neighborhood schools. But these are project-based schools, wall-to-wall, team-taught, big blocks of projects. And what I love is that for every project they assess agency and collaboration and oral and written communication and critical thinking. And when I say assess, that the learner has usually had a role to play in building the rubrics for those assessments. And so they can reflect on their own learning. They can assess assess other learners. And so it's a no surprises environment because they really own and understand the assessments and they're part of the assessment process.
Yeah, and some people think it's a hard thing to wrap their minds around, that in a learner-centered system, being clear about outcomes actually promotes flexibility and promotes autonomy. And it's that, what do we hold tight and what is loose. But one thing, Tom, you mentioned high school network with New Tech. And so I think, a lot of us are inspired by this idea that we could have a system that is really driven by the learner, owned by the learner, and yet that learner has these transition points in their experience. And one of the pivotal transitions is going from high school into the world of work or higher education. And this is where I feel like we've been perhaps most constrained by the Carnegie unit, seat time, letter grade system. You're doing some interesting work in a lot of areas around different types of ways to ensure that what that learner owns, what they know and what they're able to do, has more portability, but is not tied to courses and seat time in the way that we have in the past. Can you share a little bit about some of the emerging ideas and options that are, that you're seeing out there?
So about 2 weeks ago, we launched our New Pathways campaign. New Pathways is our effort to help American secondary schools sort of imagine the future, how to incorporate unbundled learning, so learning anywhere, anytime, in new learning models, sometimes accelerated models that bring college credit and career credentialed credit into the high school setting. And so our goal is to help every learner in America become part of a pathway that feels more seamless from high school to opportunity, careers and citizenship. Central to that idea is this idea of credentialing. And we think there's an opportunity to create a new messaging system, a new communication system in education, a better way to capture and communicate human capability. Instead of the list of classes that you took and the grades that you got, a set of credentials that will give you finer grained information and be verifiable by a scholarship organization or employer or a post-secondary institution. We think these credentials will be transported and communicated in a learner record. And we think by the end of this decade, every learner in America, at least every secondary learner in America, will have a digital learner record, like a digital wallet. Mm-hmm. And that wallet will produce things like transcripts at a point in time, but that wallet will be much more flexible, and learners will be able to permission that wallet out to an employer to gain access to a work-based learning experience. That might happen in 9th or 10th grade. Mm-hmm. And then they might be able to permission that out to a scholarship organization that might be interested in the pathway that they're on. They can permission that wallet or portions of that wallet out to a post-secondary institution and start earning college credit while they're in high school. And so we think this combination of credentialing and learner records will create a new communication system that will better enable all learners to communicate who they are, what their capabilities and aspirations are, and then better connect in these talent transactions with post-secondary institutions and employers.
So I think it's amazing, first of all, that we've had essentially like a static output from K-12
right. For like 100 years.
Since, yeah, 100 years or so, and we're able to reimagine something different. And a lot of what you're describing, is made possible by advancements in technology. So this is less of a technical challenge than it is, I think, an adaptive problem for us to solve. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, how we often find that schools end up needing to do two systems at once, create the new system as they're still sustaining the old. What are your thoughts around how we as leaders and how we as a system can manage that tension between these legacy expectations as we're building these new systems? How do you think about that change, that adaptive change process?
It's complicated.
That's why I'm asking. If it were easy, we would have done it. Right?
It's super hard. And I think it's gotten harder in the last 2 years as schools have been politicized. There's really a nasty agenda underway that I know you all have experienced one way or another. And so this question, I think, has been made more difficult by hyper partisan politics. Let me circle back to this. I first, in the chat, there was a question about portfolios. So I want to address the role that I think portfolios will play. Yes, I think every learner should be building a portfolio. And that's really, to me, that's just a digital collection of personal bests that exemplify things that they've accomplished, either individually or as part of a team. Those portfolios will, in some cases, they may be part of a learner record. In other cases, they may sit alongside a learner record that's actually a slimmed down version. But those credentials that I referenced that verify skill assertions will include evidence that's in the portfolio. So if there's a credential on written communication, it's verifying probably multiple measures of demonstrated competence in writing. And that verification will link to evidence, artifacts that sit in that portfolio. So that's how these two systems will operate together. And I think as learners are able to permission a record out to different audiences, they will be able to display artifacts from a portfolio. And so I think these, I just wanted to add that portfolio, this set of artifacts is, I think, going to be a critical part of learners being able to describe more eloquently who they are and what they can do than a list of courses.
That's
so,
right.
Michael Horn has a great new book out, and we talked about it yesterday on our podcast. It's like a master's degree in innovation. So it's a good answer to this question. So I'd encourage you to check that out. Chapter 10 and 11 and 12 are answer this question. But Devin, I think the short answer is to start small, go fast, and iterate to scale. And so we're big fans of quick tests. Michael yesterday introduced me to a new term from the business world. We know MVP, the minimally viable product.
Right.
In education, we might talk about a minimally viable experience, right? That you want a group of kids to experience something new and different with a set of supports and measures around it. But Michael talked about an MVT, a minimally viable test. And by that, he meant run these quick experiments around new learning experiences. But before you do, list all the assumptions and make sure that you're testing the assumptions, particularly the assumptions that'll get you fired if the test doesn't go very well. So being thoughtful about trying these short, small tests, and these quick tests can lead to a micro school. We've been helping schools around the country launch micro schools or small academies within a school that very quickly allow a team of teachers to illustrate the future. And with a small group of kids, it might be 2 teachers and 40 kids initially, and they can quickly show these new learning experiences and new learning environments and give the larger community of teachers and parents an opportunity to see a future state. And they might decide that's a desired future state. And so I think that's the quick answer is to
love it.
Start small, work fast, and iterate.
Yeah, I love it. And in learner-centered leadership, there's a couple of connections to what you just said. One is I talk about the risks of inaction. And, we often think that trying this new thing is going to create risk when in fact we often don't evaluate it against the risk of doing nothing. And I feel like
because that's a big, slow risk, right? It's actually a bigger risk, but it mounts over time in ways that are more difficult to see. So that's a really insightful point, Devin, that doing nothing is not free. It's not risk-free. It's actually a growing risk from doing nothing. It's the risk of irrelevance, right? Or of kids being underserved in terms of what they really need.
Correct. And, my observation, especially in these last few years where I've had more experiences like you have, where you kind of get out of one system and you get to see many systems, is the rate of change outside of schools is so fast. And schools, for the most part, are not designed to change very quickly. So I love what you're saying about, start small, take these measured, risks. The minimally viable test is a really compelling concept. And I wrote about these sprint cycles that we tried while I was superintendent, which, mixed success. One of the things I learned was that you have to take something off of the plate before you add the new thing, which is so obvious in retrospect, but we kind of forget that sometimes in leadership. But this orientation to shortening
this feedback. The permission to focus, Devin, right? It's super important.
That's right. These short feedback loops where we can learn faster by doing things, I think, is a really compelling concept. And I believe it should be connected to, well, what are we trying to achieve? How can we demonstrate that in these, tests, that we are learning new things that actually have the potential to accelerate our collective progress? So I wonder, I know in a minute we're going to, let people go into small groups and do a little debrief, but I wonder if you have any advice for this group about how to organize some of those, what I was calling sprint cycles, what Michael Horn might be calling a minimally viable test. How do we as school leaders create the conditions where that becomes more normal?
Let me just reiterate the idea of going small and quick and iterating. And, by small and fast, it might mean try something this summer with 3 kids that and then grow it into a one-day program for 6 kids next week, and then try something for one period with one group of students in the fall, right? So the idea of going quickly, like now, where and when you can, with whatever opening you have, and learning from that experience. So go fast, iterate quickly, take advantage of the unique entry points that you have. And the polarization that we've been talking about and the pandemic, they've really changed the set of entry points. In some ways, it's made the work that we do more difficult, but in some cases, it's actually created new entry points where it's changed, either the technology has changed or the assumptions have changed, and there's a different opportunity set, in some ways better than there was 3 years ago. So just being super context aware of those opportunities and entry points, and going quickly and learning as quickly as you can, and then trying to find or develop your tribe around that rapid action cycle.
Right. So I can't resist one more question before we go into the small groups, and this touches on what you were just describing, which is, we as adults and students as well often don't have enough experience or opportunities for what you call problem finding. So how do you know which problems to even find and test? So, and you've been great in, I think, challenging me to think about, it's not just solving the problem that matters, it's finding the right problem. So can you say something about the importance of problem finding in the current context and what's ahead?
An entrepreneurial mindset, it might be the most valuable thing that we can help young people develop. When I look at LCC's outcome framework of agency, collaboration, and problem solving, I see entrepreneurial mindset. And by entrepreneurship, what I mean is spotting opportunity and delivering value for a community. But that spotting opportunity requires us reps, that you get repeated opportunity to see something yourself and have it register as a problem one that speaks both to you and to a community. And we've created schools where there's almost no opportunity to do that.
Mhm.
And so we wrote Power of Place a couple of years ago, and the core tenet here is like community as classroom. And we think place-based learning, the core of place-based learning is inviting kids to understand the place that they live in and to begin to appreciate the needs of that place that are both, as I said, that speak to them personally, but are also important to the community.
Mhm.
And if every year there's at least several opportunities to do that, the problem finding,
Mhm.
we think we're really developing a super valuable set of muscles.
Mhm.
This is why we think things like the UN Sustainable Development goals are really important. We mentioned those in the book and we added some to it. But encouraging young people to understand the needs in the world.
Right.
And giving them space and time and resources, at least occasionally, once or twice a year, to go after some of those in an extended project, I think is super valuable.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. All right, Tom.